We're going to begin with former police captain Eric Adams, poised to become New York City's next mayor after being declared the winner in a hotly contested Democratic primary. The AP called the race for the Brooklyn Borough President last night after thousands of absentee ballots were counted. The new numbers saw former City Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia cut Adams' lead to just over 8,000 votes. But with only a small amount of votes outstanding, her deficit is likely too much to overcome. Adams will now go on to face the Republican nominee, Guardian Angels founder Curtis Sliwa, in November general election.
Yeah, Reverend Al, before we dig into this, let's just talk about what we've just seen in this race, and it really shows how much you understand not only your city, but also your constituents, that your congregants, I should say, and those who consider you being an advocate for them. You have, for years, been trying to explain to, as you call them, latte liberals, where the Democratic Party is, and where a lot of people of color are, that they don't want pie in the sky pronouncements and policy proposals. They want their streets safe. They want good jobs. They want basics. And here we have conservatives and moderates doing extraordinarily well in this New York mayor's race, and progressives not faring quite so well in New York City. First of all, talk about the likely winner on the Democratic side, and also what does that tell you about not just New York politics but national politics?
Eric Adams put together a broad coalition that I think shows where we are going in the future of the Democratic Party nationally. You must remember he won 4 of the 5 boroughs, including Staten Island. And there was a time it was unimaginable for a black candidate for mayor to win Staten Island. He won Staten Island. At the same time, we saw a broad coalition in the borough of Manhattan elect a black to the district attorney's nomination or select that. So I think both, you look at Alvin Bragg's race for the district attorney in Manhattan, a very prestigious position, first time a black got it, and Eric Adams at the same time, same primary. Both of them ran as one that understood the police reform movement that people like me have been part of, but the need for safety. Both of them came down the middle of saying we must deal with inequality, but we also must deal with how the city is going to function. And I think that many of our people in the Democratic Party or in the so-called left have confused noise with what is sound. You can make noise as long as what you're making noisy about is sound. People want to be safe, at the same time they want to see reform.
Yeah, and Elise Jordan, you can look at what happened in New York City. Of course, look what happened in the Democratic primary in 2020. Joe Biden, really the one moderate in the entire field, I think most people would say, ended up winning the race. And you look at the crime sprees that are going across the United States right now. Crime rates going up, certainly rates for murder and violent crimes going up, gun crimes going up. Boy, there sure are a lot of parallels, it seems, with what we saw back in the 1970s. And Democratic primary voters in Queens, in the Bronx, Staten Island, in Brooklyn, responded by electing the most conservative candidate they could elect, a former cop who is not going to do what a lot of people on the far left have been asking for over the past few years.
Joe, defund the police is a losing message for Democrats. We see that in this race, and we're going to see it in other races where, as Americans are responding to increase of crime in their communities. And you look at what happened in New York City, and it played out on the ground here among some of the most liberal voters in the country. But they want a safe city, and they want the police to be adequately funded. They're not asking for overkill. We don't need to have military vehicles down in our downtown cities. We don't need to, have a militarized police force, but we don't want to abolish the police completely. And the concept of defund the police, just the radicalism of what it would mean in theory, it scares Democratic voters. It scares enough of them where it's going to hurt the party if they don't get their messaging straight on it.
Yeah. Joining us now, City Hall and politics reporter for WNYC, Brigid Bergin. Brigid, let's go back to the actual New York City election as itself. How are the candidates all responding to the outcome here, Eric Adams, but also those who did not win, given just how it played out and how complicated this has been?
Well, we heard a clear declaration of victory from Eric Adams last night, talked about putting together this coalition of 5 borough support. On the other hand, we heard statements that were slightly more unclear from both Catherine Garcia and Maya Wiley, the 2 candidates who were his closest competitors, both talking about not quite fully conceding. And in the case of Maya Wiley, talking about really one of the other issues that has, been the elephant in the room during this race, which is the conduct of the New York City Board of Elections and its ability to execute a fair and transparent election.
Hey, Brigid, it's Sam Stein here. I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, I'm not sure this was the most confidence-inspiring election of all time. There was a notable error that the Board of Elections had about a week ago. What are the actual prospects of reform for the Board of Elections going forward? This is sort of a common refrain, it feels like, after every mayoral election, that the BOE needs to adjust, modernize, get up with the times. But this in particular seems like sort of a catapult for some reforms. But what would it entail, and what are the prospects for it?
Well, we've heard from state lawmakers an increasing cry to make some reforms. There are some pieces of state legislation that could take effect soon that could at least help modernize the agency in the short term, give more powers to a set of co-executive directors as opposed to just the 10 commissioners from each of the boroughs that currently make a lot of the decisions. But to really structurally overhaul the agency would require a state constitutional change, and that's a process that takes time. It needs to go through 2 consecutive legislative sessions and then before voters. And so what this will require is continued energy and focus by state lawmakers if they really do want to make an overhaul that would change the agency from being a bastion of partisan politics to being a professional, nonpartisan agency.
So, Brigid, break down the numbers for us, if you can. I know it's still too early, but it seemed Eric Adams had a pretty comfortable lead after the first round of voting. Then and Maya was in second place. Then you had, of course, the going through, I guess, the 9 rounds. I think I would have a heart attack if I were a candidate going through 9 rounds. I couldn't handle that. 1 round was too much. But how did things shake out where this race got so close? Do you have any insights for viewers who wonder what happened to Maya Wiley, how she dropped down to 3rd, and then how Catherine Garcia got so close at the end? Where did her strength come from?
Well, I think there are a couple issues at play here, Joe. Number one, the results that we got on primary night were only the first choice votes of people who voted in person on primary night and during early voting. And then they did not apply the ranked choice voting algorithm to them on those initial results. And so, had they done that, essentially what we learned last week once they gave us the corrected numbers, is what we might have known on primary night had they applied it. So we could have seen that this was a closer race to begin with. That's number one. Number two, we had 125,000 outstanding absentee ballots in addition to affidavit ballots cast during the primary. And when those ballots were counted, we saw the margins narrow. Catherine Garcia, who came in second place, picked up a larger share of those ballots and, saw she was coming behind Eric Adams by about 15,000 votes last week. That slimmed down to about 8,400 votes this week. So she picked up some numbers, but it wasn't enough. And in New York, the margin needs to be even closer if you were to, say, trigger a manual recount. You would have to come within 0.5%, and that's something in the neighborhood of 500 votes. So even though we know there are still some ballots outstanding, we know that there is still some counting to be done, it doesn't appear that either Catherine Garcia or Maya Wiley, who fell further behind in this latest count, would have enough to overcome the lead that Eric Adams currently has without some votes being disqualified.
Wow, but what a tight race, especially the top three. Really.
City Hall and politics reporter for WNYC, Brigid Bergin, thank you so much for helping us through this and covering this for us.